Okay, now we're going to start the next outline here, and I don't think these last two will actually be nearly as detailed. We're going to talk some about the discussion board that you guys shared some information on for sleeping and waking. One of the key structures that really is involved with sleep and waking is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Now, why is it called the suprachiasmatic nucleus? Well, it's so charismatic that they just had to name it something super. No, that's not the reason at all. Supra describes the fact that it's above the optic chiasm, which is your visual tract going back to your brain. It seems like there are a lot of neurons up here that control the sleep-wake cycle. Next, I wanted to just share a few details on the effects of sleep deprivation. Many of you have probably experienced this. There are two different things we can talk about. One is sleep inertia. Sleep inertia is the idea that if you've ever taken a nap, like I do, sometimes you wake up and you're just not sure where you are or what's going on and you think it's the next day. That's called sleep inertia. It's the immediate feeling when you wake up of where you are and where you're not, and you have sleep inertia. Sleep debt is the idea that if you have many nights of not getting enough sleep, that'll accumulate and that'll cause you long-term harm. Theories of why we sleep and dream. Well, we don't really know the answer to that. We think we need to sleep just to help us function in a good way. Next, dreaming. Of course, Freud has his ideas on dreaming, but we think that dreams may be a way of just reliving what's going on in the outside world, so there's not too much to say about that either. If you ever go to a sleep lab, if you know people who have done this, you go through different stages during the sleep cycle, and this will be important to note. It's called an EEG. My daughter actually has epilepsy, and an EEG is a procedure where you put basically recording electrodes on the brain, and you can record different series of action potentials as is described. I think somewhere in chapter 3 it's an EEG, and when you're awake, you basically show beta waves. Beta waves are high frequency, low amplitude waves. You go through beta waves and then you basically go through alpha waves. Your first stage of sleep after the alpha waves is where you start showing theta waves. Beta, alpha. No, it's beta and alpha. If you look at what's going on in stage 1 and 2, you can see the waves are actually getting to be not quite as asynchronous. Neurons are starting to fire together. And so you go through stages 1 and 2. By the time you get to stage 3, you start showing a lot more of what we call stage 3 and 4 delta waves. Delta waves are high amplitude, low frequency waves. They're basically meaning that neurons are firing at the same time. And some people think this is your deepest stage of sleep. What's really interesting is after you go through this stage, you get into what some people would consider to be your deepest stage of sleeping, which is REM sleep. That's where you do most of your dreaming, and it's most of your deepest sleep. But if you look at the cycle there, it looks like it's actually back to alpha waves. So it's actually sometimes called paradoxical sleep because it looks like your brain is awake, but actually you're in your deepest stage of sleep. So you need to know the EEG waves and the cycles. You can add information from chapter 3 in your book. I also wanted to add on a little more detail that when you have epilepsy, like my daughter has, something goes astray. Your brain does not fire correctly, and if you look at that little picture, you're basically having too much electrical activity all at once that leads you to have seizures. A lot of the medications they give people with epilepsy are products that help GABA bind better, causing a chloride influx and thus slowing brain activity down so you don't have seizures. Finally, next, very interesting, they've noted that when people go into REM sleep, they seem to show particular types of waves. They're called PGO waves. That when you go into REM sleep, we see first that you have high frequency activity in your pons. Remember, the pons is the part of your brain that's kind of activated for being awake, but you're going into REM sleep. Then your geniculate actually stands for your thalamus, and then your occipital lobe. Your occipital lobe, of course, would bring up visual imagery with dreaming. So we think that when you're in your dream state, you go into PGO waves. One of my favorite old shows used to be Star Trek The Next Generation, and in one episode they were trying to predict when Deanna Troi, the counselor for the ship, you don't have to write this down, was going into REM sleep, and they said, oh, she's showing PGO waves. So these PGO waves are many times predictive of going into REM sleep. And what they've actually found is that acetylcholine seems to be the neurotransmitter that's released when you go into REM sleep. So acetylcholine might be very related to REM sleep. If you look at the abstract down there, it says that basically if acetylcholine is not working there, you're not going to go into REM sleep. I've also put something with norepinephrine for another abstract. Norepinephrine seems to be the neurotransmitter most related to waking up in your locus coeruleus. So when you wake up in the morning, you see a lot of activity in the locus coeruleus, which is part of your pons, having a lot of norepinephrine in it. Strangely enough, serotonin doesn't really seem to be connected in any straightforward way to sleep. We believe that people take serotonin-type products, and if you drink a warm glass of milk before bed, but serotonin doesn't seem to be type reductionistically related to sleep in any systematic way. It seems that acetylcholine is very related to REM sleep. Norepinephrine is related to waking up. Finally, I shared with you there are some websites that you may want to look at if you ever want to look up drug effects and how they do. Clinical trials are run on different experimental drugs. WebMD is a reputable one, and rx.list goes over that as well. So for chapter 3 of your book, let's see what the book has to say about things here. We start off with this. Not too much we need to focus on here. Very important to add to your outline, page 83. Circadian rhythms are your daily rhythms of the day, sleeping and waking. And so you go through them. You can actually see on page 84, they actually record the stages you go through. You see the pictures of the beta and the alpha waves, and then you get into the delta waves, and then you get into REM sleep. If you're deprived of REM sleep, you can't function very well. As we get older, we get less and less REM sleep. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is there. You can add a little bit from your book on theories of why we sleep in your outline. Sleep deprivation is a big problem. If you're deprived of REM sleep, as often has been done in studies, when you're actually allowed to go into sleep, you go right into REM sleep. You have different sleep disorders, narcolepsy, where you have sleep attacks. You also obviously have insomnia, where you can't sleep and you take products to help that out. So I think that kind of covers it for the sleep part of things. And let's see, drugs that affect this. When you take opioids, things like morphine, they will help with your pain, but they'll also make you sleepy. Same with barbiturates. This is on page 103 of your book. Stimulants, amphetamines, nicotine, cocaine, they all work with the neurotransmitters in your body. They will keep you awake, and they will cause problems for you long term. LSD is another one, so hopefully you can add a little bit from your book on states of consciousness, and this maps back to what these drugs do and how they work. Thanks all very much. That'll cover it for lecture number 2. Bye-bye.